Ger, but maybe you might give us a little bit of an introduction and where you come from.
Yeah, back in the 50s I entered this world, and born in a place called New Park, just on the outside of Kilkenny. School in Kilkenny, school on this side of the town and on the continent side of the town. They say there's better air over...
Continent side?
Well, the continent is over John's Bridge. That's the continent.
The continent?
So that's where I was born.
You mean Europe?
That kind of alluding to that, because we're far away from everything else. But we always believed that there was a better class of air and a better class of people over in the continent. So I'm saying that now, living dangerously on this side of the town. But I moved over here now. So, and that was it. I spent my time here. I started working when I was 16 in the Kilkenny People newspaper. I stayed there for 21 years. And then in 1993, the Watergate opened, went for a job there, got it as theatre manager, and was there for 25 years.
Wow.
So that'll bring you up to speed.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What an amazing journey. Watergate is an amazing theatre.
Yeah.
So you were part of that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I suppose it was fantastic, but it was, I say since the 60s into the 70s, people were looking for a new theatre. And there was groups founded and formed and money raised, and then it kind of got serious in the 80s, and it was house-to-house collections, there was cabarets run, there was pantomimes run, and there was, I suppose, 500,000 raised.
And you were part of that whole...
Yeah, it was called the Mayor's Theatre Fund Committee, so it would have been maybe 10 or 12 people on it. And I suppose you'd have to be fairly honest about it, and the two main driving forces on it were, say, Donald O'Brien, who was a former town clerk, and Tony Patterson, who was a school teacher but always had a love of theatre. And but it was getting nowhere quickly, in the sense that every time you raised another 5,000 or 25,000, prices were going up. And bottom line was that they needed the Arts Council to come on board, and they weren't too anxious to come on board because at that stage there was loads of theatres, or enough of them, because they were funding them. So they probably didn't want another cement block around their neck. And then along comes a Minister for Arts called Michael D. Higgins, who is now our president. And Michael arrived down and got on very well with the people, and he pushed it forward. So when he was Minister for Arts, it became a reality. And he happened to be in the Labour Party, and the local politician, Seamus Patterson, was in the Labour Party. And over a few drinks or coffees or whatever, a meeting was arranged. And it was agreed then that the Arts Council would come in 50-50 with the theatre. So we'd raise X amount and they'd match it.
Fantastic.
And then
they could see your commitment, really.
The Watergate was born, and that was it. And it was opened in 93. And Michael D. wasn't president then. It was Mary Robinson. She officially opened it. And I think there was 3 guest artists. Mick Hanley was one, a fellow called Jerry Lavelle, and Finn Barwright. And so you had all the army members down, and the local army presented arms, and the whole shooting gallery. We had bishops and the devil knows what. But it was a lovely night, great night to open it.
And you were the director then?
Yeah, from the start, first one in, first one indoors. So I'd say it was just one of those things, but it worked. And great team around us then. There was a board of directors set up, and it was, a lot of it was shooting in the dark, if I was to be honest, because you just didn't have a clue. You were asked to do budgets, and we had nothing to relate it to. We were saying, how much is it going to cost us for electricity for a month, and how much will this cost us? We didn't know. It was all pure guesswork. Most of it didn't work out the way we planned, but it was a first time for Kilkenny with this theatre, and we just went with it. And well, I suppose the proof of the pudding is 25 years later, it was still going, and all the national acts were coming down to us, so we got on very well with it,
Sounds like it was born out of love and local commitment and passion and funding.
And I think that's the secret of it. Yeah. There was nothing in it except people wanted it, and they wanted it for the people of Kilkenny more so than anything. Now, you have to remember, of course, it was a handing over of a baton up for years. Like in the 1700s, there was a theatre on, say, the parade across from the castle, and it closed down because they were short of money. Further down the street where the Citizens of Advice studio is now, there was a theatre there, closed down because there was no money. Then in 1902, Lady Desert, who the new bridge is named after, she founded one where Zuni Hotel or restaurant is now. So that was the best probably theatre in the country. and it had a raked stage and fitted about 1,000+ people, and it was never empty. And the first show to open it, strangely enough, was an amateur production, and the second show was a gymnastic display, you know. But then there was touring groups coming around, and they would go in there. But focusing on the local aspect, it was all, you know, tops of the town, local groups, Kilkenny choirs, St Mary's Choral Society, and then they put on musicals maybe 3 times a year. And at that time, of course, now, and I'm not saying I remember this, but everyone was going out on bicycles and going home from work on bicycles at 5 o'clock in the 50s and 60s. And where Willoughby's restaurant, or as famously known in Kilkenny as Willoughby's Clock, there would be a queue there for about 400 or 500 metres. People waiting to buy tickets to go into the show that night. So, you know, rather than people saying, "Oh, the Watergate was this," like we're only passing on. And we just took up the baton, you know, and that
it came from the roots. It came from the roots.
Absolutely,
people,
and just it was a tradition that passed on, and I think people love going to a show and saying, "Oh, we know them, and we were part of this, or we collected for it," and you know, you had groups like the Musical Society and the Pantomime Society, the New Theatre Group, different groups like that, who all came to the fore, and to prove the point, then they stood in for front of house, all voluntary. Watergate Productions was formed in '93, and so we presented maybe over 40 shows, I'd say, and no one took money for it. You know, if we had to hire in a designer, that was the extent of it. And I think there was something like 550 to 600,000 raised by that group alone, just for the upkeep of the theatre, because it was obviously run at a loss, and will continue to run at a loss, I suppose. And like all theatres, they're not on their own and that, you know.
Wow.
So yeah, so and some great shows, fantastic shows there. And I think it was good at the beginning too. We brought in people like some of you might know Owen O'Driscoll. His father was on the board, Punchias, and you had Jerome Hines, who would be a brother of Gary Hines, the director from Galway. So big heads, you know, that came in, and they were used to doing this work, and they would have been involved in theatres all over. So they came in at the start and just stay behind and say, "Look, this is what we need to do." Or, you know, very, very helpful and giving advice. So,
what is it you think about Kilkenny that inspires this kind of level of love for creativity and drama in this way?
I'd say it's just not confined. I mean, if you look when you come in here today, you see a hurling match on the television. You know, there's a black and amber stripe on the television. No matter what's going on, you watch it. And if you're walking down the street on a Saturday, people will say, "Are you going over tomorrow?" And you know straight away they're talking about a hurling match. And that's a love. Now, taking a smaller section of that and the theatre, or what's on this week, what have you on next week, is such a group coming. So if people love it, they love it. And they're supporting their own. And they see people up on stage or backstage. And I think it's a point that a lot of people sometimes forget, that whoever is the 4 people or the 34 people who are on the stage, like it's lads playing the hurling, they're brilliant. But to remember that behind the scenes, there's a manager and a lad carrying a bottle of water, or the hurls for the team. And the same over there, people on the front of house, brilliant. Never a word about them.
By the volunteers that
all
nobody
volunteers,
will ever
and they
know
don't
about.
want it, and that's the beauty of it. They don't need to be told, or they don't need to get their photograph taken and say, "Look, we were down helping at this." People backstage, you know, and without naming names, would say there was a fellow called Mick Kavanagh there, and he worked in the brewery, and he'd come in after being working from 6 until 3, and he'd come in to do stage manager on a voluntary basis, and he had a team of 6 or 7. And it's just fantastic to see ordinary working people just being part of that. Because for long times people would say, "Oh, the theatre, or would we be okay with going in there?" Anyone, you know, it was just brilliant. And the doors just opened up and people just flooded in. But then you had things like to entice them in. So if you had a show by Samuel Beckett coming next week, and people say, "Oh," you know, but the week before you had a pantomime or a musical or a Tops of the Town, and people were coming in and saying, "Oh yeah, you know, mind another bit of this is great." And you know, you're kind of teasing them in, if you like. So the local input was essential. And there's groups around Kilkenny that are just fantastic. If bordering from, say, drama, amateur groups to professional groups. No, so you had the likes of the Devious Theatre doing professional shows. You had Dream Stuff Theatre group, who were sort of part of the Young Irish Filmmakers. They were coming in, say, in the early 90s, and every one of them to the last, mad out. Youngsters that 13, 14, 15, you know, ready to tear up the place. But you had to let them go and give them their head, you know. Now, I don't mean they literally tore up, but they didn't go too far from it. But from that,
Expressing
they
themselves.
develop, absolutely. And I think the secret is to recognise that they are developing themselves, and they're artists, but they don't know it yet. And there was one particular chap, we'll say, who is no longer with us, Ross Costigan, just as an example, like bursting with energy, brilliant, and a pure artist from top to finish, you know. He's just fantastic, and multiply that then by 30 others of his ilk, and that's what you got over there. So when they put on a stage, it's just the whole place electrified, your energy. Because there's one thing having likes of myself or groups like that of an age doing a show where it's nice and calm, but then all of a sudden you have these lads coming out doing stuff that you're saying, oh Jesus, is that okay to say that? But they just did it, and it just bursted through the scenes, you know. And from that, you know, you have the likes of the John Martins of this world writing for RTE television, and you know, there's a load of them. You know, they're all, some of them are actors now on an international stage, from Dublin to London to Brussels. So
You're speaking about, for me, I'm getting a sense of a very supportive, creative environment that is in Kilkenny for young people.
That's what it is, and you know, again, we don't want to be kind of focusing on any one group, but all of them come together. When you need something done, and when you need, say, front of house, or you need a set brought in, you just phone the 3 different or 4 different theatre groups, and they all come together and say, sure.
Yeah. For nothing.
And absolutely for nothing. Yeah, well, for nothing financially, but for something, the bigger picture was always there, you know. And I think the beauty of it is too, you could be walking through Super Value and one of your neighbours or one say, will you put me down for 3 on Friday night? It's that local, and that's the truth, you know. You get that. And equally they'll come and tell you after a show, you know, you would tell them or say, look, this show is coming on Friday night, you might like it. But you're only doing that because you do think they will like it. If they don't, they'll explain it and say, look, don't give us that one anymore, we're not really into that. And then on came all the different festivals, the arts festivals, so probably a bit more, I suppose, different and challenging than some of the stuff that you'd normally see in Kilkenny. You had a comedy festival, you had a trad fest, you know, the film festival. And the strange thing, they were all brilliant, but take Tradfest, run locally, source locally, and probably the best of the festivals. And that's no disrespect to the other festivals, because the other festivals are brilliant, but you can see the leaders and the organisers running from John Street to High Street to down to Parliament Street, and making sure everything is okay, and you'll have a lad there with a speaker on his shoulder helping out. You know, making really nothing out of it, but fundraising for it so that people can enjoy the best. And the atmosphere during the Tradfest in town, you couldn't buy it, you know. It was similar to, say, a Fla Ceola in Kilkenny. Different kind of music, but, you know, intertwined.
Wow.
Yeah.
But someone who knows Kilkenny so well, where would you be your favourite spot? I'll ask you 2 spots. One where to connect with other people, and then another where to chill out.
Well, I suppose there's a few places, but the Canal Walk and around by the ring of the canal and in through the Castle Park, any day, rain, sunshine, that's the place to go. It's just, and there's a little pond up at the back of the Castle Park. You just sit there and have a chat with the ducks if you want to. It's grand, you know. Other than that, I mean, to meet people, like if you had asked me this question 20 years ago, I'd have given you a slightly different answer. But now I don't really do much of that. I like to keep my own space and do my own thing. You know, hang out with the family or do whatever it is. That's the kind of thing. But I'd like to go to Nolan Park. I think that's part of the seed, breed and generation of most Kilkenny people, or quite a lot of them anyway. And from the days we used to cross over Denny Max Field, cross up over the wall for free and into the park. They built that up, unfortunately, we can't go in for free anymore. But if you want a day to connect, hurling is the place to go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, fantastic.